Thank you, Gary. So I'm going to try to go without a microphone because I always don't know where to hold it, how close to my mouth. So if you cannot hear me, please let me know. I'll try to speak up and I'll try to be a little bit closer to you. I have about 30 slides to kind of walk through to kind of show a little bit about what's happening really in the local economy, because that is what gets expressed in construction and development activity. Construction is often a reactive industry that reacts to what's happening and money flowing in the economy. So just for a little background, so population growth. Historically, the city has grown about 1 to 1.5% historically. For 2016 to 2017, actually the state of Idaho grew at 2.24%, and that made it the fastest growing state in the nation. First time I think that's occurred in recent history of the state of Idaho. Within the region, cities grew about 1.29%, just about 1.3%, the county 1.4%. Whitman County and Pullman just a little bit over 1%, and the nation as a whole grew just a little bit under 1%, 0.8% for that time period. So we have seen growth that has both outpaced the nation, outpaced both Whitman County and Pullman just in the recent time period, but we do see continued growth in the community. It is interesting, and this is enrollment between WSU on the top line and U of I from 2006 to 2017. So it is interesting that that population does continue to grow, but we're about 1,500 students fewer than we were in 2011 in Moscow. And these numbers are different, slightly different than numbers that you'll see reported by the University of Idaho. These are on-campus degree-seeking students. A lot of the numbers you see that are closer to 11,000 include the dual enrollment high school students. So what we're interested in my department is really bodies that are in Moscow attending classes at the University of Idaho and spending their money in the local economy. So from 2011, we've dropped just about 1,500 students during that time period at U of I. During that same time period, WSU has added nearly 3,000 students over in Pullman. So two very different stories between the two universities so close together. Now, unemployment, you can see over the last 10 years from 2006 to 2018, we did peak here, Sauk County. Here is the gold line, the lower line. We did peak at unemployment here at 6.8% during 2009, which was kind of the bottom of the recession for us here locally. But most recently, unemployment has been below 3%, actually below 2.5% over this current year. So that unemployment rate has continued to decrease, which has certainly been a positive trend in the community, and it also follows both the state of Idaho and the nation's trend as a whole. Now, full-time, part-time jobs, also we saw a substantial reduction during that recession time period. So going from 2006 to 16, cumulative here, this is the top line, gold line is Sauk County, total full-time and part-time jobs. See, we peaked at 21,930 in 2008, and we dropped about 1,000 jobs. By the time we got to 2011, we were at 20,935 in Sauk County. So we saw substantial reductions in employment during that recession. It's interesting to note that just here in about 2016, we finally came back to pre-recession job levels. I mean, this recession was deep, it was significant, and it had a very strong impact, but it was muted by growth that occurred across the state line in Whitman County, as you'll see here in a second. This is the state of Idaho employment numbers, so you saw they followed a very similar pattern, so it's very similar, but obviously they kind of grew back and met that crest here a little bit sooner than we did. So it took us a little bit longer to recover to pre-recession levels. Now look across the state line. This is that trend here for Sauk County. This is Whitman County during that same time period. About 2,800 positions, new jobs were created during that time period through the middle of that recession. And Schweitzer is no small part of that. 1,600 of those jobs occurred in the manufacturing space, in that industry. We have roughly historically in WSU added faculty and staff to accommodate the increased growth and capital development that's happening during that time period. And historically we have had the benefit of having 30% of WSU's employees and 30% of Schweitzer's employees residing in Moscow. And so that we netted just about 800 and some odd jobs off this number, which really helped soften that valley that we saw during the recession. But it's clear that we had a substantial downturn during the recession here, and we are just kind of now pulling out of it in Sauk County. The good thing that happened during the same time period, though, is we did see per capita income growth that exceeded both the state of Idaho and the nation. So incomes did grow during that time period, even though we saw a loss of jobs. So during that time period, we had about just under 33% per capita income growth, from 2006 to 2016. There's 25 or about 26% for the state of Idaho and just about 30% for the nation as a whole. So we did see income growth during that same time period, which is kind of interesting. Now our economy here in Sauk County, this big slice of the pie is government. So the University of Idaho, the county seat, the school district, the city of Moscow, all the government enterprises we have constitute about 51.5% of all earnings in Sauk County. But if you look then in the private sector on the other side of the slice, some of the larger pieces are those healthcare and social services, retail trade. I mean, ever since the 70s when the Moscow Mall and the Plus Mall were all at the same time, Moscow kind of commanded the retail center for the two-city region. And retail trade represents about 8% of all earnings in Sauk County. We also have professional, scientific, and technical services at 4.6%. I'll note educational services here is just under 1%. I'm just noting that because you'll see on the next slide some income growth. And accommodation and food services, where we've seen the greatest growth in income and earnings and wages over the last few years has been retail, accommodation, food services, professional, scientific, and technical services, and that healthcare and social services. Those are all fairly large pieces. They're almost 5% and almost 10% for healthcare and social services. So that's where we've seen the greatest growth in incomes and jobs. So if you look from 2012 to 2016 in Sauk County, this is just wage growth by industry on that time period. I wanted to highlight that educational services, it's a big growth piece, but it was less than 1% of all earnings in the county, so keep that in perspective. But those that were fairly sizable, healthcare and social services, we did see that constitutes that almost 9% of all earnings, saw 17.6% growth in earnings. Retail trade had 15.6%. Accommodation food services grew by 33, almost 34% during that time period. And the professional technical services grew by 30% that time period. Now the two I really focus on is professional technical and healthcare social services. Those are kind of your primary jobs. Retail trade, accommodation, food services, a lot of times are lower income earning positions. So we really want to kind of look at those primary jobs that drive the economy. So healthcare, social services, and professional, scientific, and technical are where we are seeing some growth. We did see some retraction in both utilities, manufacturing, information, finance and insurance, and transportation warehousing. These are all fairly small sectors in Sauk County's economy, so they didn't have a really large impact, but we did see substantial growth across the board in many other industries. There is an independent economic consulting company called the Polycom Corporation, and they have a methodology where they rank the strength of economies across the U.S. This specific slide just shows Pullman here as the red line and Moscow here as the blue line. So there are 550 micropolitan statistical areas. These are areas that are less than 50,000 in population but constitute a statistical area for the Census Bureau. And so you can see back here in 2006 we were ranked 275th out of 550, so right around the middle of the pack. We kind of both, Pullman was down here at 524, fairly low at that time period. And Pullman continues to have that growth, and we were kind of running along the same path here up until about 2011. And I think those impacts of that recession, that drop growth really kind of caught up, and we started to see our rankings decline. So we're here down in the 400s. But here the last 4 years we've seen, or 3 years, we've seen substantial growth. And as 2018, we're ranked 184th in the nation out of 550. So we are seeing strength. You are seeing that per capita income growth and expansion in those industries that I identified. Now, housing affordability is obviously a key issue, and you hear it just in about every economic development talk, community development talk that you see. And it's really been the correlation or the relationship between earnings and wages and housing costs. For most of the recovery and recession time period, for all the working age groups, and these are different age cohorts. The green here is 65 and over, so generally not necessarily in the working force, but everyone here from 25 to 65, you can see from, these are inflation-adjusted earnings, grew kind of slightly from the late 90s into the 2000s, maybe saw some continued growth here until the recession, and pretty much every age cohort saw real earnings decrease for an extended period of time, and it was not until just about 2014 that we started to see that curve change. And that has kind of stymied a lot of economists thinking that with all of the low employment rates, that wages would need to increase to attract people back into the workforce. Those that are underemployed or those that are not participating because there aren't jobs that suit their qualifications or pay compensation that they're willing to work for would cause upward pressure on wages. And it really didn't happen as quickly as they would have projected, but it has begun to happen here about in the last 4 years. But that income growth has generally gone to the higher income bracket and higher earners in the nation. So for the top income, so the five quartiles here, we have the top income earnings and then the upper middle class. So if you look at the percentage of the income gains, it's either the top or the middle income, upper middle income that have gained most of those improvements over that time period. And we look at the share of wealth gain during 1988 to 2016. Again, it's really gone to the top income households across the country. The other dynamic you've seen as a result of the recession is home ownership. And so this is the home ownership rate in the United States. Back here in the mid-'80s to the mid-'90s, home ownership rates were about 64% maybe, and that grew considerably through the 2000s till the peak of the recession here, and then decreased even below those levels that we saw in the mid-'80s to mid-'90s. And home ownership dipped to about 63%. So we saw a lot of people transitioning out of home ownership into either rental properties or other housing opportunities. And that had a substantial impact on construction, single-family starts, and where the residential market is really focused on multifamily construction through most of the recovery period. We also had this little phenomenon of interest rates through the recession. So this is going back from about 1954 for the Fed's interest rate. Really never heard of interest rates in that time period down near zero for such an extended period of time. And obviously that had a big impact on mortgage interest rates, which, back in 2000, we bought our first house and we had about 7% interest. I thought that was pretty good. Our interest rate now is about 3.5%. This is really unheard of interest rates, and it has masked a lot of this housing price issue. And I think you're going to see more of that as interest rates begin to rise and mortgage rates begin to rise. You're going to see increasing pressure on households and increased cost burden on households to afford housing. So this is a little diagram that I'll try to explain. This is interest rates over this time period, 1987 to 2017. So those interest rates have declined and been held fairly low. The income, median household income, has been fairly flat. So when you adjust for inflation, wages have been fairly stagnant, income's been pretty flat, so you don't see much change there. The cost of housing built up as it was building up through the housing bubble, and then once that burst, housing median house price dropped down. But then since about 2011, it's gone on a steady pace up. And there's the cost of inputs, those materials, wood futures, those are all priced, and then there's a significant scarcity of labor. When the housing bubble burst, people left the construction industry to other industries, and right now there is a substantial shortage of labor, and housing prices and new construction have gone through the roof. But that low interest rate has masked essentially the monthly homeowner cost down here. So why that cost has been going up, those low interest rates have helped people afford a home that maybe they otherwise couldn't have. But with those interest rates changing in the future, I don't know that that's going to be a good trend in the long run. So it's just something to be aware of, that some of this increase in housing costs has been masked by these interest rates and the lower home payments that people have realized. If you look at Sauk County, it's kind of hard to see, the sun just came out. This little square here is Sauk County. So this is affordability. So what percentage of recently sold homes were viewed to be affordable to that homeowner? And generally that means that less than 30% of their monthly income is going to housing costs. That's generally the cost burden threshold. If you pay more than 30% of your total monthly income for your housing costs, you are considered to be cost burden. If you're below that, then you're within a relatively affordable range. You can kind of see here, so the yellow is 25 to 49% and 0 to 24%. So the coasts are obviously seeing some of the highest pressure and affordability and the highest cost burden. But we are sitting here at about that 50 to 74% of the housing payments were affordable to that buyer. But that means that somewhere between 25 and 50% were cost burden as well. This trend in costs has probably impacted renters more than it has homeowners, because those interest rate declines have helped mask some of that cost of the home. But renters obviously can't take advantage of that. So if you look from 1960 to 2016 across the nation, the median renter income has been fairly flat, again, common trend. but the median gross rent has continued to increase over that time period. And so the percentage of cost-burdened renters has continued to increase to where across the nation it's now about 48% of renters in multifamily apartments are viewed as being cost-burdened. Looking at Moscow and Lathrop County, this is always, it gets challenging with Moscow because we have a high student population, have relatively low incomes, and so it does tend to skew the data somewhat, but we have people that get captured in that area that aren't really well represented, so they get masked by all the students, but we have people that obviously have challenges with housing costs. For renter households in Lake Sauk County, the share of households with cost burdens is 41%. A severe cost burden is if you're spending more than 50% of your household income to housing, that's 21%. So we have 2,000 households really in Lake Sauk County that experience that cost burden in renter households. If you look at owner households, it's a little bit different. So 19% of the owner households are viewed as being cost burdened. 11% are viewed as being severely cost burdened for homeowner households. So there's about 1,879 of those households in Lake Sauk County, just to give you a perspective of the whole. And you can kind of see here, this is the average. This includes both renters and owners of the share of cost burden over time from 2006 here to 2016. And it's kind of bounced around, and then through that recession kind of went up, and we've seen that decline. And I think that's the per capita income has been increasing. That's going to help pull people out of that cost burden share. So it has dropped recently, which is good. And we're not as severe as some other areas of the country, but it still is something to be aware of. So I thought I'd just highlight a few recent projects and permit activity. So these are housing starts for the U.S. from 1960 to 15. The red is really multifamily construction. The green line is single-family construction. And here you've got the recession shaded in gray right there. So you can see the severe drop in activity. But since the recession, multifamily construction, because of this shift in the cost burden and housing affordability, has gone to the multifamily side, where single-family construction has been kind of about less than half of historical averages. So you can see that a little more clearly here zoomed in. And it really plays out in our data here in Moscow as well. So if you look at our historical for the last 20 years, typically about 40 houses per year get permitted for construction, maybe 16 duplexes, 71 multifamily units. So we get about 127 units permitted for construction every year over the last 20 years. For commercial construction, it's based on valuation, and that number is about 8.4 million on average for commercial construction. So here's single-family construction from 2000 to 2018. And 2009, we dropped off the cliff. So, you know, we had our own little bubble going here. So historically, we were doing 40 single-family homes per year. And here in 2006, we permitted 79, so nearly twice that amount. So we had a pretty high construction period going right in this time period. And then the recession hit, and single-family housing starts have been down at about 20 to 30 since that time. So now it's been almost 10 years of about half historical rates. We're slowly kind of climbing up there, and I just looked at the numbers this morning for this calendar year up through today, we'd be at 32 or 3 homes. So that's on the next slide. So we're just a little bit above last year's number, but we really reflected the same pattern you saw in the national trends. For multifamily, for us, it's really kind of spiky. We're a small market, so we get a big project. So the Grove was built here in 2009, so 196 units. That was just that one project. So you get a lot of fluctuation. We had 201 units in 2017, so that was Identity was 132 of those. And then we had several other projects under construction, so we just had a big year there. 2004 to 6 was the A Street build out. So a lot of the apartments you see in the A Street corridor up Baker happened during this time period. And at that point in time, the university president asked us to invite developers to a meeting in council chambers, and he said, we're going to grow and we need housing. And this was kind of the response that we saw getting built out on the A Street and the Baker corridor. So if you look at our total housing units, the single family and multifamily, again, 127 is our traditional average, but it really bounces around a lot. And certainly leading up to the recession, we had up to 300 units one year permitted construction, but it's been kind of fairly moderate since then, although we did have an active year last year, 2017. So for this year, so 33 units so far this year for single-family construction. No duplexes have been permitted this year yet. 96 multifamily units. So again, multifamily continues to be fairly strong in the market. And the projects that are built are filled before we're finished, and they're waiting to move in for that final inspection. So there is a demand, and you talk to the owners and the property managers, it's not necessarily students that are moving in. Obviously, with the U of I's numbers, it is other people, standard working people that are moving into the units and not necessarily student population. So for this year so far, up to today, 129 units permitted for construction, so just about average, a few over average. And I think we'll get a few here, but we're kind of past the peak of the construction season. Winter weather will set in before too long, so we won't see many more units this year. For commercial construction, we are so far at about 13.1 million, and 10 million of that's the NRS project. So that's the 100,000 square foot addition to the old Tidyman's grocery store. That's a large project, so again, that pushes us over our typical average, about 8.4 million for commercial construction. And if we were to put here, this is where we'd be for 2018. So our average kind of across the board, and we just have big projects that pop in, but our average is right about 8 million for the commercial construction activity. So just highlight a few projects. So we've had 3 residential subdivisions under construction this year. We have the Rolling Hills 8th edition out on 6th and Tawny, 24 single-family lots. Just a continuation of the development of the Rolling Hills edition. Indian Hills 9th. This is kind of a new area since it probably hasn't seen much development for the last 20 years south of Indian Hills Drive. They're kind of on the west end of Indian Hills Drive. We've had the Indian Hills 6th edition on the east end of Indian Hills Drive that we've seen more development happening over the last 5 years. Indian Hills 9th picked up this portion there. I think there are 25 single-family, 3 two-family lots, and also the site for the Palouse Prairie Charter School's new school facility. There are 3 other commercial lots on the U.S. main frontage, so from Pepe north up to Creekside. There are some commercial properties that are also included in that plat as well. And then the Harvest Hills edition, phase 1, that included 23 twin home lots and then a 2.1 acre neighborhood business lot here on Mountain View and 3rd. So they're on the east side of town. So for commercial projects, just as I mentioned, Palouse Prairie, about a 16,000 square foot new school facility. You can see it under construction on the south side of town. They're at Southview and Powers Avenue. The Northwest River Supply expansion, again, 100,000 square foot addition to the existing about 44,000 square foot building that allow NRS, who's currently operating out of 3 facilities in town. They've got the South Main building, they've got a shop, the frame shop over in Fountain Industrial Park, and then they've had NRS East, which Tidyman's has looked abandoned, but is packed with merchandise, and everything that they sell comes in there. It's unpacked out shipping containers, it's moved over to South Main, where they fulfill orders, and then they have frame shop fabrication happening over in the Fountain Industrial Park. So this will allow them to consolidate all of their operations in one location, which would be great for them. They've been a 40-year company, out of Bill's garage. That's a $10 million project for phase 1, which is the building and shelling the front office space, and then phase 2 is probably another $5 to $6 million to finish out the office space up front to allow for the full consolidation on the site. We've had multifamily development on Indian Hills Drive. We had 84 units total. We had 36 permitted early in the year. I think we permitted the rest of them on that project. It's another multifamily project. And over on corner of Farm and A, there's a multifamily project there, 48 units across from Glencoe. Just under $6 million project located there. One I'm kind of excited about is, it's Mod Pizza. Actually, I've never been to Mod Pizza, but it's the Jack in the Box site, and it's been an eyesore for a long period of time. So we did receive plans for the redevelopment of that site, permit applications to demolish that structure, get rid of the fence, and build a new retail center that's about a 3,200 square foot building for a new Mod Pizza location in town. So it'll just be nice to see that property transition over to something a little more productive than what it's been. The other is the Idaho Central Credit Union purchased what I always call the Ambassador Auto site. They purchased that property, and they are planning to build a just under 5,000 square foot branch beginning in March, April next year. So demolition is going to be happening this year, and then they'll be working on construction next year. So that'll be a nice redevelopment of that site as well. The other one that we're looking forward to is the Dumas Seed Warehouse property. So this is over on 8th Street in Allman. And it's the old warehouse that they've been tearing down for what feels like a decade, I think about 6-7 years. And we have gone through a division of property and a rezoning of the existing brick powerhouse building to allow it to be repurposed to a commercial use, and they're looking at a cafe, bistro type use. And then the developer of the site is also looking at doing 36 condo units on the remainder of the property, with first floor parking and 3 level units above that on the site. We're also working with them on a pedestrian pathway along the south edge to tie First Street here over to Honest Park to the west of the site. But it's one that we're hoping that'll get going here the next year. So that's all I have with that. I'll turn it over to Nancy.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill.